The silence in the room curdled, turning from heavy to hollow. Saksham's gaze didn't just flicker. It anchored itself onto the canvas visible through the sliver of the door. He didn't see his own likeness. He saw her. Inside the studio, a woman stood alone on the canvas, swallowed by a void of absolute, suffocating blackness. There was no light, no exit, and no ground, just a solitary figure draped in nothingness. The air in the room was a living, breathing thing, heavy with the scent of chemicals and the metallic tang of old wounds. He could feel it in his bones. Saksham's hands moved with a terrifying, reverent tremor, his fingers sinking into the silk of her hair as it fell around her shoulders in a dark, chaotic waterfall. He looked at her as if she were a prayer he was no longer allowed to speak, a man starving at the gates of a temple he had personally set ablaze. She was a goddess. His goddess. His gaze searched the messy bun, the smudge of red on her cheek, the exhaustion in her frame, and he didn't see a woman to be managed. He saw his own damnation. Every line of his body screamed of a man who would gladly watch the world burn to ash if it meant he could keep her heart beating against his for one more second. It was a raw, bleeding obsession, the kind that didn't ask for permission and didn't know how to die, even as he realized she was no longer his to hold. Falak stood paralyzed, her breath labored, each shallow inhale a battle against the scent of him that still felt like home and poison all at once. Her fist clenched. Her eyes were not mirrors of his yearning. They were cold, obsidian wells of a hatred so deep it had turned into a form of mourning. She didn't see the man. She didn't see the air. She only saw the boy who had cheated, the boy who had taken her porcelain heart and crushed it into dust 9 years ago. The man standing before her, with his lethal grace and his desperate eyes, was a stranger. She looked at him and felt the charred remains of a love he had incinerated, a love that had once been her entire world and was now just gray soot in her lungs. While he looked at her with a heat that could melt steel, she looked back with a frost that could stop time. She was the ghost of his mistakes, and as his forehead pressed against hers, the only thing she felt was the suffocating weight of a man who had realized too late that you cannot own the thing you have already destroyed. "What the hell are you doing here?" Her voice was a jagged whisper, a sliver of ice cutting through the stifling heat of his presence. "How did you get in?" Saksham didn't answer. He couldn't. The words died in his throat, choked out by the sheer, agonizing sight of her. He simply stood there, his eyes roaming over her face with a thirst that was almost violent. He drank in every detail, the defiant set of her jaw, the way her labored breathing made the paint-stained beige fabric of her jumpsuit rise and fall, the messy strands of hair that clung to her damp forehead. She was so fucking beautiful it felt like a physical blow to his chest. It was a beauty that hurt, a sharp, visceral ache that reminded him of everything he had sabotaged. He looked at her not as a man looking at a woman, but as a drowning man looks at the shore, knowing it exists, knowing he needs it to survive, yet knowing the current he created is pulling him further into the deep. He didn't care about the locks he'd bypassed, or the boundaries he'd shattered to stand in this shadow-drenched room. To him, there were no walls, no gates, and no laws that could keep him from this moment. His silence was his confession. He was there because he was a man possessed, a man who had spent a decade trying to outrun a ghost, only to find himself kneeling at its feet. He watched the hatred burning in her eyes and welcomed it, because even her hate was a tether, a final, fraying cord that kept him connected to the only soul that had ever truly seen him. "Can we be just Jojo and Pearl for a few minutes?" There was something in his voice, rough, hoarse,